I am the Wang Group's heir. My first love's wedding was planned most lavishly and magnificently as possible. We invited every powerful person in the city, but nobody anticipated that my future mother-in-law would unexpectedly demand an extra $3 million as a dowry to settle my brother-in-law's gambling debts during the wedding procession. As everyone expected, I turned around and handed the bouquet to the bridesmaid behind me to maintain my dignity. Chapter 1. My future mother-in-law smiled as she blocked the wedding room door and said, "George, your family can afford this $3 million. We just want to see your attitude." My brother-in-law crossed his arms, the layers of fat on his neck trembling as he said, "Brother-in-law, hurry up and pay. The people over there are already demanding their money." My mother-in-law slapped him and gave him a look to silence him. I asked, "Willow, will you marry me?" Under the shocked looks of my mother-in-law's fiancé and brother-in-law, I was able to guess already. Last night, my brother-in-law most likely gambled once more and lost much money. I finally relaxed after taking a deep breath and recalling how my fiancé pleaded with me to help her leave this family while her eyes were watering. Despite her strength, my fiancé is a delicate girl. A fat man pushed a stack of red bills at her at a dinner party where I met her, urging her to stay and drink with him. My fiancé bit her lip, her eyes red, and she shook her head obstinately, declaring that she would never do such a thing, no matter how desperate she was for money. The sharp paper cut her cheek as the angry man threw the money in her face. I took over. People showed me some respect, since they knew I was a member of the Panda Group. My fiancée blushed and expressed her gratitude to me. I felt sorry for her. It is uncommon to find someone in today's world who is unadulterated and does not submit to wealth. This was especially true when I discovered that her family preferred to raise sons over daughters. I wanted to get her out of this terrible predicament. My brother-in-law abruptly cursed. "Go to hell after marrying my sister. Where are we supposed to get the money?" And I scowled. "Mrs. Liu, this wedding has already cost a lot, and there is an $880,000 dowry. Our family's finances are tight right now, and it's really hard to come up with an extra $3 million at once. How about we get married first and then we can discuss the rest later," I said gently to my mother-in-law. "My family owns a major business in the city, and I am the only child." My mother-in-law quickly interrupted him, forcing a dry laugh, saying, "I always said the wedding shouldn't be too extravagant. Look at this. What we spent on the wedding could have been given directly to us. Furthermore, the money spent on the wedding would not be given to them arbitrarily. How could they handle the wedding so carelessly? Maria would not want me to pay such an extravagant dowry, so I asked, 'Can you open the door first? I want to know what Maria thinks.' With pursed lips, my mother-in-law stated that although she, as Maria's mother, could assume full responsibility for the wedding, she would only open the door once I had paid the $3 million. Behind me, the groomsmen were quiet. I shook my head and glanced at the bedroom door lock, which was accessible from the inside. "To open the door, it's $3 million, said David, one of the groomsmen, nudging me and whispering in my ear. "There will also be wedding shoes and a red envelope for addressing parents later. Who knows how much more they'll ask for? What are you going to do, brother? If you can't gather the money, I can borrow some from my dad for you." When I called out, "Maria, I'm outside. If you're willing to marry me, please open the door," my brother-in-law became frightened and came running at us like a giant meatball. My brother-in-law and the groomsmen scuffled with one another. Click. The door opened. However, it wasn't Maria behind the door. The groomsmen and I hurried in, but my mother-in-law, who was standing off to the side, looked unhappy as she watched the bridesmaid open the door. Chapter 2. My friend and bridesmaid smiled broadly and said, "I've been a cop my whole life, but this is the first time I've gone undercover. George, hurry up and get in. They won't let me open the door, but I've done you a huge favor." Willow, a friend of mine from childhood, was a bridesmaid. As the wedding day drew near, my fiancé's family's relations were devastated that they were unable to find enough bridesmaids. My only option was to let my childhood friend, who was on break, take over. I asked Maria if she wanted to go with me as I hurried into the room. She could break free from the patriarchal hold of her family if she did. After a brief pause, Maria asked, "Have you gathered the $3 million?" Her words struck me like a bucket of cold water, soaking me from head to toe. After giving Willow a disapproving look for opening the door, my mother-in-law pushed her way by, looking at me smugly and saying, "My daughter always listens to me. If you want to marry her, call your parents and get the other 3 million, or you'll miss the lucky hour. Willow was shocked to hear what my mother-in-law had to say. 3 million for a dowry. That's a sky-high dowry, she blurted out, and David instantly stopped Willow, gesturing for her to keep quiet. Willow was standing behind me, obviously upset. Everyone in the room fell silent as they awaited my response. I looked at my fiancé's face and asked, "Is this what you think too? If I can't come up with the money, you won't marry me." Maria's eyes reddened once more, and she said, "I want to marry you, but, George, my brother lost 3 million last night. Without this money, they'll cut off his hands. I'm sorry, but he's my brother, and I can't just ignore him." I stared at her icily and asked, "If you were already married to me and your brother lost a few more million, would you still expect me to pay off his debts?" My brother-in-law interrupted. "Of course, she'll always be my sister. You think marrying her means she's sold to your family. Of course, she'll take care of me." My fiancé scowled but didn't argue. That's when I realized she had been lying to me all along. She assured me that she would cut off all contact with her family and never again pay off her gambling brother's debts if I married her, saving her from a household that prioritized sons over daughters. In actuality, she would simply transfer the burden to me rather than cease making payments on her brother's debts. The lucky time was drawing near, so my parents called to ask where I was. "George, I'm not being unreasonable. The lucky time is almost here. Don't miss it. How about this? You can just write a promissory note for the extra 3 million. My fiancé gave me a hopeful look and said, "Darling, if you write the promissory note, we can get married." Willow was about to respond, but David quickly pushed her back. Willow was pleased to hear my parents' call. "Don't cause trouble, ancestor," David whispered behind me. Willow muttered to herself, calling David a jerk, claiming that George was being bullied and that David wasn't assisting. Willow's eyes were red with annoyance when I turned around. "Willow, will you marry me?" I knelt on one knee after picking up the bouquet in Chapter 3. Willow froze. She understood right away when I gave her a wink. With exaggerated star-like eyes, Willow pretended to be ecstatic as she looked at me and said, "I will." My groomsmen all cheered together and joined in on the fun. The first person to return to reality was my mother-in-law. "George, I was just kidding. You don't need to add the dowry." Maria, stumbling in her bulky wedding gown and barefoot, ran to my side as she hurried over to grab my arm with an obedient smile. Every time I saw her looking so pathetic, I used to soften. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and asked, "George, are you going to leave me?" Normally I would feel sorry for her, but this time I was just repulsed. I grabbed Willow's hand and turned to go after pushing her hand away and saying, "I gave you a chance. You asked me to save you. I'm sorry, but your family is a swamp. I can't save you. Don't contact me again." In front of us, my brother-in-law was obstructing the door like a solid wall. I had always taken care of Maria, but when he yelled, "My sister is your woman, you have to take responsibility," I gave him a chilly look and informed him, "I never touched your sister. She's not mine anymore. I broke up with her. I was determined not to touch her until we were married." My brother-in-law began to act out, barricading the door and preventing us from leaving. Willow, tying up her hair, said, "Let me handle this. I've never liked this guy." David and I covered our eyes in silence as he yelled, "Well, if you broke up with my sister, you still have to pay for the breakup compensation. What, she's been with you all this time for free. You can't just say you didn't touch her. Pay up." The champion of all fights was Willow. David and I opened our eyes after a few screams. Now my brother-in-law was on the ground. With the most derogatory words, my mother-in-law screamed and flung herself onto my brother-in-law. "George, you're not a man. You're so unreliable. You promised to marry me. And now you're turning your back on something as small as a dowry," Maria yelled behind me, humiliated and angry. I could no longer stand to listen to her. Her actions and words chilled me. Along with my groomsmen, I climbed over my brother-in-law and got into the wedding car. I felt so tired on the way to the car. My first love was Maria. I had loved her, really loved her. I even argued with my parents for a long time before we decided to go ahead with the wedding. I was silent for a while after David the driver noticed that my eyes were closed. He nearly caused me to forget when he asked, "George, what about the wedding?" I gave my parents a quick call. My parents were silent for a few seconds after my mother said, "Hey son, where are you? Hurry up and come here." I responded, "Mom, call off the wedding." "I'm sorry. I should have listened to you from the beginning." They must have reassured me after guessing what had happened. They argued that calling off the wedding was preferable to regretting it afterward. They informed me that this wedding might just consist of a dinner with loved ones. Maria flooded me with calls and messages after she hung up, apologizing for everything. She was under pressure from her mother and brother, and they threatened to stop her from being with me if she didn't comply. She begged me repeatedly to come get her. "It's over," I texted her. Maria bombarded my phone with messages. "You promised to protect me forever," she wrote. "You promised to be my hero. I was your precious rose, you said. George, do you no longer love me? Are you going to give up on our love?" I read her messages with a bitter smile and then shut off my phone. Chapter 4. I was sitting in my office thinking about how I had gotten into this mess over the years by alienating everyone to marry Maria. Some of my friends and family told me to just put up with yesterday's wedding banquet for the time being to save myself from embarrassment, because it had become a joke. However, I was afraid that more problems would arise the longer I stayed. In the future, her family would probably cause a lot of problems. My thoughts were abruptly interrupted by a commotion as Maria and her secretary rushed into the office and pushed one another. I gestured for the secretary to leave after she quickly apologized, saying, "Sorry, Chairman Wang, I couldn't stop Miss Maria." I asked Maria what she wanted as I leaned back in my chair. I was disgusted, so I said, "Stop calling me honey." Maria sulked, looking wronged as she knelt in front of me and coquettishly said, "I'm sorry. Yesterday it was all my mom's fault. She said if I didn't do what she told me, she wouldn't let us get married. Honey, I still love you. Don't be angry. Please forgive me. We are no longer together." She trembled and said, "George, I know you're upset. From now on, you go your way and I'll go mine. I played along with Willow yesterday, which is why you're upset. I am aware that you are not with her. How could you like such a fierce woman? She even hits people." I sighed and replied, "Yes, I'm not with Willow, but what right do you have to talk about her?" Maria's face turned pale and red in turn, and she asked, "George, do you still love me?" This question again. All these years with Maria, whenever I didn't do things exactly as she wanted, she would start asking, "Do you still love me?" I was so fed up with it. I poked her shoulder and shouted, "Whether I love you or not, you should ask yourself. I've fought with my parents for years just to marry you. You wanted a dowry of $880,000. Fine, my parents didn't want to pay, so I went out and earned it myself. How many nights did I stay up late working? You don't know. How many drinks did I have to endure with others? You don't know. I worked through several all-nighters, almost dying from exhaustion. My parents only gave in because they were worried about me. They agreed to the dowry, to the villa, and everything. But you and your mom and brother just casually asked for another $3 million. Sure, my family can afford it, but that doesn't mean we're made of money. You can't just take advantage of me because I like you." My emotions were running high, and as I said this, I couldn't help but feel my eyes redden. Maria still looked at me with a pitiful, pouty face. She was always like this. Never seeing her problems, always placing herself as the victim in her mind. I was supposed to always accommodate her. Her reaction suddenly made me realize Maria and her family would never change. I took a deep breath to calm myself and said coldly, "All right, I have nothing more to say to you. Let's avoid each other's lives from now on. Never again appear in front of me. George, for the sake of all these years, I'm not asking you to marry me again. But can you lend me $3 million? If I don't get it, my brother will have his hand chopped off." Maria resisted leaving and abruptly knelt in front of me, choking on her words. She began to undress, exposing her white shoulders as she said, "Give me the $3 million and I'll do anything you want." I felt like a stranger to her as I gaped at her in disbelief. She didn't look like the strong but frail girl I used to know. I had been patient with her over the years, even restraining myself from taking the last step with her, out of compassion for her. Instead of pushing her, I would rather suffer myself. She was now idly taking off her clothes. As I lit a cigarette and stood by the window, looking at the traffic below, I said, "Get out." I picked up the phone and said, "Secretary, come in. There are cameras in the office. If you're thinking about accusing me of something, forget it." Feeling wronged, Maria got up and put on her clothes. She said, "George, can't we go back to the way things were?" I said, "No." I took a long drag of the cigarette, the smoke filling my lungs before it gradually drifted up. Are you leaving on your own, or should I have someone throw you out? I asked. The door was knocked on by the secretary. Chairman Wang, may I come in? Maria hurriedly straightened her clothes, picked up her bag, opened the door, and left in an attempt to keep her dignity in front of others. Chapter 5. Maria's mother was standing beside my car when I got to the parking lot after work. She snorted coldly and said, "If you're going to keep up this attitude, then I'll start setting up blind dates for Maria." She spoke up with a haughty expression, saying, "George, you have an attitude problem. If you wanted to marry Maria, you should have come begging me long ago. If you could just beg us a little, we might consider forgiving you." I ignored her as she opened the car door. Don't regret it. I couldn't understand why her family was so confident about everything. Why did they think I would continue chasing after them like some dog forever? I didn't want to say a word to her. I just got into the car and slammed the accelerator, driving off. Maria's mother stumbled back as the car zoomed away. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her brother emerge from some corner. The two of them were looking at the back of my car, seemingly discussing something. I quickly tapped on my phone and found the property manager's number. I asked, "Can anyone just walk into the parking lot now? Handle this from now on. Neither my ex-girlfriend nor her family is allowed anywhere near our company." Understood, Chairman Wang. The next day on my way to the office, Maria's mother suddenly dashed out from somewhere and threw herself in front of my car. Fortunately, my car had an automatic obstacle avoidance function, and with an emergency brake, I barely missed her. I got out of the car in a fury, shouting, "Are you trying to die? Are you planning to sacrifice your life to pay off your son's gambling debts? Are you trying to frame me?" Maria's family had constantly lowered their status in my eyes, and I couldn't help but think the worst of them. Compared to yesterday, her mother's attitude had completely changed. Observing her forced smile, adorned with crow's feet and a double chin, filled me with disgust. She was holding a lunchbox and grinning obediently. "Son-in-law, you're overthinking things. Yesterday I noticed that you looked a little worn out, so I made some chicken soup for you. Try it, it's still hot." Excessive acts of kindness without any justification are either manipulation or dishonesty. She obstinately lay across the hood of my car, preventing me from leaving. I gritted my teeth and said, "Get away from my car. If you bother me again, I'll call the police." Maria had been crying at home all day, so she begged George to give her another chance. Maria does love you. Where was this concern before? When I went to pick her up for the wedding, she didn't have this attitude. I shifted into reverse gear and applied the gas pedal. She grabbed the lunchbox and chased after my car. I drove around her, and as soon as I got back to the office, the first thing I did was switch cars to avoid any further harassment from Maria's family. Chapter 6. After I kicked Maria out of my office that day, I didn't hear from her again. David suddenly contacted me looking all mysterious, claiming he had a huge secret to share with me. "George, this is a really big secret. Do you want to hear it? For just 998 yuan, I'll tell you everything." I wasn't in the mood and couldn't stand David's annoying attitude, so I said, "No need to keep your secret to yourself." David, unable to get what he wanted, paused awkwardly. I knew exactly how he worked. Sure enough, David grabbed my arm and said, "Forget 998. How about 98? I rolled my eyes and said, "No need, just let it remain a secret forever." Seeing I was about to leave, David hurriedly grabbed me and gritted his teeth. "Don't go, I'll tell you. Your little brother, because he couldn't pay back the money, had one of his fingers chopped off." I asked. "That's it," he replied. "Isn't that enough to vent your anger? He made things difficult for us during the wedding procession." I sneered, about to walk away, when David grabbed me again and said, "Come on, I'll take you somewhere." Without waiting for me to respond, David dragged me to a dinner party. I asked, "What am I doing here?" Just as I spoke, I saw Maria again. She was standing next to that fat man who had harassed her when we first met, with his arm around her slim waist. I felt a bit confused but didn't show it. After all, there was no longer anything between us. When Maria saw me, her face momentarily showed panic. Then she pretended not to recognize me. During the dinner, the fat man kept pushing Maria to drink for him. At first, she obediently drank, but as time passed, she couldn't handle the alcohol, and I saw her throw me a pleading look. I ignored it. When I helped her before, it was because I saw she couldn't resist the harassment, but now she was voluntarily at this dinner as an accessory. The fat man started touching Maria's thigh and gave it a hard slap, laughing as he looked at me and said, "Bro, I remember you. You were fighting with me about Maria back then." He smoked a cigar and remarked slowly, "I didn't take it too seriously because I know you're the Panda Group's heir. However, your taste is terrible." He seemed to recall something and laughed, stating, "A woman like her will accompany you if you give her a small amount of money. You still wanted to marry her. Everyone in our small circle had her. And you still want to take the plunge. You're still young." His words caused the awkwardness around the table to change, and Maria looked like she was going through something and wanted to argue with him, but she was afraid to speak up, so he put an arm around him and said he was talking nonsense. I got up to use the restroom because, after all, Maria had been the woman I loved, someone I treated as precious, and now she was being humiliated in this way. I looked in the mirror, unsure if I was the idiot or if Maria was the tragic one. Then she appeared behind me, her eyes full of tears, and she said, "George, I'm not like he said I just need the money, I had no choice." I said, "It's none of my business." "George, how can you be so heartless? If you had just lent me $3 million, would I have ended up like this? Would my brother have lost a finger?" Maria grabbed my sleeve as I was about to pass her after washing my hands. I scowled and remarked, "I didn't make your brother gamble, and I didn't make you come here to drink. Why are you blaming me for the things you and your family have done wrong? I didn't go after your family, but don't think I couldn't have," I said, yanking my arm violently away from her. When I said, "I'm not dealing with you out of respect for the past, so get lost. Don't make me do something I'll regret," Maria began to cry once more and bit her lip tightly. "The easiest way to solve everything is for you to cut ties with your family," I said. "I could crush you and your family easily. All of your issues will be resolved after you do that. What a bottomless pit your brother is." Considering that we had previously been together, I gave her a final piece of advice out of kindness. Maria sobbed, "But he's still my little brother." She was helpless and willingly became the support system for a brother who was addicted to gambling. I pushed her away and left the hotel, sending David a message that said, "I'm heading back." Late at night, just before I was going to sleep, David called me. He rambled on, and I was so exhausted that I nearly hung up. But he finally said, "Bro, I have to tell you something. Brace yourself." I replied, "Go ahead." He sighed and said, "You might have been tricked." I went to that fat guy's circle and asked around. You're familiar with those greasy, newly wealthy uncles who like to play around. Maria has always been good at pretending to be a little innocent flower, specifically targeting those kinds of men. She accidentally snagged you. He quickly added, "But it's okay, bro. You cut your losses in time. Just think of it like stepping in dog poop." When he heard me remain silent, I responded, "It's fine. It's already over." He added, "Good. Just don't cry under the covers alone at night." After a few jokes, I hung up the phone and quietly pulled the blanket over my head. I felt unclean, so filthy. I never touched her, at least. Chapter 7. I got a call out of the blue from the fat man who used to harass Maria. He advised me that men should concentrate on their careers and not allow Maria to interfere with our collaboration on a project that our two companies were about to undertake. He apologized by offering this dinner. I reluctantly agreed to have dinner with him after multiple attempts to arrange a meeting. A group of women surrounded the obese man. After swirling the tea in his mouth for a moment, he turned and spat it into one of the women's wine glasses. I waved my hands in shame and said, "Let's talk business. Can you have them leave first?" The fat man laughed heartily. I didn't expect Chairman Wang to be so innocent. He poured me a drink, but I refused. He casually waved me to choose one of them and slapped a woman in a white bodycon dress on the back, saying, "Go and serve Chairman Wang." I held my glass up to him and drank it in front of him, turning it upside down to demonstrate that I had finished it. He said, "Chairman Wang, if you don't drink it, means you haven't forgiven me. Here's the deal. You drink this glass, and I'll give you a bit more of the project." With a slowly sly smile, the obese man turned to face me. As I fell back in my chair, I realized the drink had been tampered with, daring to take the project from me. "You're out of your depth. This project is already mine," he whispered in my ear, laughing sinisterly. "Come in, we're done here." Click, clack. Closer came the sound of high heels. As they pulled me upstairs to the hotel room, two of them staggered and said, "Let's go, the room's ready. Stick to the plan and hurry up. Be careful, his people might catch on." "Hurry up and strip." Maria's voice said, "Can you leave first?" The fat man replied, What are you pretending for? What haven't I seen? Maria stopped talking, and the only sound in the room was the rustle of clothes. From the side, the fat man muttered a few dirty words. I opened my eyes and yelled, "What the hell are you doing?" The fat man grinned evilly, lifted his phone, and said, "What am I doing? The great George chairman of Panda Group is forcing a good woman. Do you know what kind of damage this would do to your company if these photos get out?" I said, "You went through all this trouble to set me up. Just tell me what you want." He replied, "It's simple. Give us $5 million and you step out of the project. I'll take it all." Maria, too terrified to look at me, hid nude behind the fat man. The fat man shrugged indifferently, took out my phone, and played with it in his hand, saying, "The phone's in my possession. How are you going to call the police? Once this is done, do you have any evidence?" I said, "You're extorting me." He laughed. "Chairman Wang, don't make it sound so ugly. We're just doing business here." I asked, "Aren't you afraid I'll report this to the police?" With some of his men, David, who had been hiding outside, kicked open the door. In a panic, Maria snatched up the clothing on the ground and covered herself. "You think I'd trust you that much? No preparation? You think I'd come to dinner unprepared?" I said, gesturing to the hidden button camera on my shirt. The fat man and Maria looked shocked when they saw the camera. "That glass wasn't yours," the obese man stumbled. The fat man muttered a curse as he realized he was done. "Now, what's it going to be, public or private?" I asked. "We're all old foxes at the drinking table. Swapping drinks and pouring wine isn't that hard for me." I nodded, telling him to go, and he said, "I've spent my whole life playing with eagles and didn't expect to be pecked in the eye by one. I'm out of the project." The fat man left Maria and hurried away without saying anything. Maria knelt in front of me after the fat man left, realizing that no one was standing by her side. She said, "George, I'm sorry." I rubbed my temples and said, "Don't say anything useless. I warned you last time I don't want to deal with your family. I don't want to see you again. Just tell me your brother's legs or arms, choose one." Maria's eyes widened in shock tears, and snot flowed as she sobbed. "No, he's my brother George. Please let me go this time for the sake of all the years we spent together." I nodded to David and his men, signaling them to pay close attention. Maria was so grateful that she scurried out of the room when I said, "Okay, this is your last chance." All I was doing was frightening her. It would never be my intention to commit crimes. Chapter 8. My family started pressuring me about marriage and introducing me to possible matches as things started to slowly return to normal. I didn't want to go home, even though it was finally the weekend. I pulled David out to join me for tea. David said, "Big brother, you called me out, but you haven't said a word. We can't just sit here doing nothing, right? A friend of mine just opened a private club. Do you want to go check it out?" After giving it some thought, I decided that it might be a good way to kill time. He was referring to the floating tea leaves in his cup. My phone abruptly rang as we were ready to leave. I took the call. Once more, that family was the source of the trouble. I was asked to assist the police in rescuing a hostage. After being pushed to the limit by loan sharks, my ex-brother-in-law Marco was now threatening to give the police $5 million while holding a knife to his sister Maria's neck. Marco then threatened to kill Maria if I didn't go-home talk to him after the police refused. I couldn't contain my resentful laughter. I didn't care about Maria's life or death. They were just a series of arguments between siblings. The police appeared a little hesitant, but they insisted that I come, so I said, "Sorry, I have no relation to his family. Can I refuse to go?" They claimed that Marco was emotionally erratic and could act irrationally toward the hostage. I reluctantly consented to assist them and made my way to my former mother-in-law's home. For my safety, the police would not allow me to enter the area, which was cordoned off. All they let me do was remain outside the window and talk to Marco. Because Marco was upset, the kitchen knife was pressed firmly against Maria's neck, leaving her skin covered in multiple bloody streaks. Maria had a terrified expression on her face. Beside me, my ex-mother-in-law was sobbing and yelling for her son to stop, and she was also demanding that the police collect funds to save her daughter. In the corner, just out of sight of the window, stood Marco. Snipers had already positioned themselves outside, and a middle-aged policeman was attempting to talk Marco out of making any hasty decisions. Maria stood in a pool of yellow liquid, her face streaked with snot and tears. When she saw me, she became excited and wanted to say something, but was afraid to do so. Her neck was firmly pressed against the knife. Marco hid behind Maria because his larger body was too small for her. All he did was hide his head behind her. He peeked out at me, then pulled his head back shouting, "George, your family is so rich. You can't give me $5 million? Are all you rich people so cold-blooded? Can't you help someone out?" My ex-mother-in-law dropped to her knees in front of me, begging, "Son-in-law, please give him the money. He's still just a kid. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's been pushed to the edge. Please have mercy and save him. You're the only one who can save our family now." The middle-aged police officer helped her to her feet, trying to calm her down. I didn't say I'd help him, or not. I just stood there coldly watching their family drama unfold. I suspected this was another one of their schemes to get money, but this time the police had been involved. I silently wondered what would happen next. If I gave him the money, Marco would likely ask for an escape vehicle. But with the current police force and technology, he wouldn't be able to escape. If I didn't give him the money, would he kill his sister? Marco, seeing I wasn't saying anything, began to break down, crying, "I've been forced into a corner. They already chopped off one of my fingers. They said if I don't pay them back, they'll cut off one of my legs. If I can't pay the money, I might as well die with her." When I still didn't respond, his anger flared and he shouted, "Do you think I want to use my sister as a hostage, George? I hate you the most. I was going to kill your parents and take your family's wealth, but..." He choked up. "You guys have such good security. I didn't even have a chance to get close to your parents. Why are some people born with everything while others are born with nothing?" Maria's neck wound deepened and she struggled in pain. Marco's face twisted with rage as he shouted, "If I'm going to die, I'll drag you down with me." He then threw the kitchen knife at me. The knife flew toward my face, but I managed to dodge just in time. A gunshot rang out. Marco, having thrown the knife, revealed himself just in time for a sniper's bullet to strike him. Maria collapsed to the ground. My ex-mother-in-law froze for a moment, then screamed and rushed inside, throwing herself on top of Marco, trying to pull him up and screaming my name. Marco's mouth foamed with blood, and the floor was soaked with it. The police and paramedics rushed in, pulling my ex-mother-in-law aside to treat Marco and Maria. In a frenzy, my ex-mother-in-law lunged at me, crying out, "All you had to do was agree to give him the money. Why didn't you agree? Why didn't you just give him the money? It's your fault my son is dead." The middle-aged officer tried to stop her, but he couldn't hold her back. I put my arms up to shield my head and kicked her away. She went wild, throwing herself at the police officers, grabbing and hitting them, shouting that they had killed her son. A few officers rushed in and restrained her. Chapter 9. After Marco went to prison, Maria and my ex-mother-in-law disappeared, and I didn't hear anything from them. One day when Willow came over during her break to hang out with us, she suddenly confessed her feelings to me. I agreed. My parents and Willow's parents were both very enthusiastic about arranging our wedding. After Willow and her family left, my parents called me into the study and said they had something to tell me. My dad asked, "Have you seen your ex-girlfriend's mom recently?" I was a bit puzzled by the sudden question and shook my head, saying I hadn't seen her. My parents exchanged a look before my dad continued, "She's been hanging around our neighborhood lately." My mother gave me a weird look and continued, "And she was dressed so lightly for the winter. At one point, she even attempted to stage an accident involving our car." I looked at my dad and thought, those two have their eyes on our family. They won't stop until they get something out of us. She was only wearing a dress and a thin coat. We live in the north where it's well below freezing in the winter, and everyone wears down jackets or fur coats. Who would stand outside in a dress, could it be? I said. "Just to be safe, Mom and Dad, you should move into the house in the southern city for a few days. The formaldehyde has been released, and it has been empty for some time. Her family is crazy, and her son is incarcerated. I'm worried she might do something to you guys." My parents agreed. As soon as I got home, I had my secretary keep an eye on my ex-mother-in-law's movements just in case she tried something. After all, she had nothing to lose. A few days later, my secretary came to report that after waiting at the entrance of our neighborhood for a few days, she hadn't seen our car and got bored, so she left. Recently, she stopped hanging around our neighborhood and started doing square dancing instead. With her bold dance moves and swaying skirt, she managed to hook up an old rich man. While dancing, she sprained her ankle and fell right into the old man's arms, making him feel some romantic stirrings. She swindled 200,000 yuan from him, and soon his wife and children showed up at her door, beating her up in a fit of rage. My ex-mother-in-law gave up on any attempts to get money, but she was now desperate for her life. The old man's wife and daughter had no choice but to take her to court. As for what happened after that, I told my secretary not to worry about it anymore. That family would take care of her. Chapter 10. My marriage to Willow went smoothly. Relatives and friends all congratulated us, saying that good things come after many trials and that I had found true love. They praised Willow endlessly, calling her as beautiful as a flower, as graceful as a fallen goose, with beauty inside and out. I glanced at Willow, who insisted on wearing a police uniform for our wedding. 3 crows flew overhead. What did all these compliments have to do with Willow? She was almost too handsome, surpassing me in looks. All the female guests at the wedding were screaming and cheering, calling the bride so handsome, completely overshadowing my presence. One evening after the wedding, Willow was lying in my arms when she suddenly asked if I knew what Maria had been up to lately. I didn't take it seriously and casually replied, "No idea whatever she's doing, it's none of my business anymore." Willow sat up and said, "That's not what I meant. I heard a coworker discussing a case today and realized it had something to do with her. The loan sharks didn't let Maria off the hook after her brother was imprisoned. The loan sharks apprehended Maria shortly after her mother disappeared. They lied to her, saying if she didn't pay back the money, they'd have her brother killed in prison. But they couldn't even get to Marco in prison. They were just tricking her. Sadly, Maria believed them. She told the loan sharks she needed more time and had a way to make a lot of money to save her brother. She requested that they send 2 people to watch over her and assist her. Willow's words left me stunned. Maria seemed like a stranger to me now, as if I had never known her, and the years I spent with her felt like a dream. Maria planned to lure several girls, imprison them, and force them to engage in prostitution while filming and uploading the videos online. She's facing charges for organizing prostitution and distributing obscene videos, which could land her a sentence of over 10 years. I said, "She chose her own path. We are powerless to change it. Let's go to bed." That family then vanished entirely from my life.